The photographer was kicked out of a wedding for messing up the photos, but the millionaire saw the old folded picture that fell from her pocket, with "Daddy, I love you" written on the back. It was a photo of him with his daughter at age 4, before she disappeared 21 years ago. The late afternoon Chicago sun filtered through the towering windows of the Meridian Ballroom, casting golden streaks across the marble floors where Lauren Spencer crouched behind her camera. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the 3 cups of coffee she'd downed that morning, to shake off the exhaustion of working double shifts at the diner all week. This wedding gig was supposed to be her salvation, the one job that could pull her small photography studio back from the brink of bankruptcy. "Can you get a closer shot of the bride's bouquet?" The wedding coordinator's voice cut through the ambient chatter like a knife. Mrs. Pemberton was the kind of woman who wore her authority like expensive perfume, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "The Ashfords are paying premium for every detail to be captured perfectly." Lauren nodded, adjusting her position near the altar. The bride, Vivian Ashford, looked like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Her dress probably worth more than Lauren's rent for the entire year. This was old Chicago money, the kind that owned buildings instead of renting apartments, the kind that could make or break a struggling photographer's career with a single recommendation. She'd been shooting weddings for 3 years now, ever since she'd graduated from art school with nothing but student debt and a dream. Most of the time, she photographed modest celebrations in community centers and small churches. But this was the Gold Coast elite, the kind of event that could open doors she'd only dreamed of walking through. The ceremony was flawless. Lauren moved silently around the periphery, capturing the exchange of vows, the tears in the groom's eyes, the way the light caught the bride's veil as she turned to face her new husband. Everything was going perfectly until the moment that would haunt her for months to come. As the couple leaned in for their first kiss as husband and wife, Lauren stepped backward to get a wider shot. Her heel caught on the edge of the ornate Persian rug that had been placed specifically for the ceremony. The stumble was minor, barely noticeable to most of the guests, but it was enough to throw off her aim instead of capturing the kiss. Her camera clicked at the exact moment her lens cap, which she thought she'd secured, fell directly onto the camera body, blocking the shot entirely. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Not only had she missed the kiss, but when she frantically checked her camera settings, she discovered that in her nervousness, she'd accidentally switched to the wrong ISO setting. An hour earlier, half of the ceremony photos were either overexposed or grainy beyond repair. "Excuse me, Miss Spencer, Mrs." Pemberton's voice had dropped to a deadly whisper as she approached during the cocktail hour. "May I have a word?" Lauren's stomach plummeted as she followed the coordinator to a quiet corner near the towering windows overlooking Michigan Avenue. The woman's perfectly manicured finger scrolled through the preview images on Lauren's camera with the precision of a surgeon and the coldness of a judge delivering a death sentence. "These are completely unusable," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice rising just enough for nearby guests to glance over. "The kiss, the most important moment of the entire ceremony, is ruined, and these lighting issues..." She shook her head in disgust. "Mrs. Ashford specifically requested you because someone said you were promising. This is beyond amateur." Heat rushed to Lauren's cheeks as more guests began to notice the commotion. She could feel their stares, hear the whispered comments. These were people who moved in circles where reputation was everything, where one mistake could echo through an entire industry. "I can fix this," Lauren stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have editing software. I can enhance..." "Fix this," Mrs. Pemberton's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You think Photoshop can recreate the most important moment of a woman's wedding day? The bride's family flew in from 3 different countries to witness this ceremony, and you've managed to capture nothing but garbage." The coordinator's voice had risen enough now that the conversation near the bar had quieted. Lauren felt like a spotlight was burning down on her, exposing every insecurity, every fear that she wasn't good enough for this world she'd been trying so desperately to break into. "I want you out," Mrs. Pemberton continued, her words precise and final. "Pack your equipment and leave immediately. And don't expect payment for this disaster. In fact, you should be grateful we don't sue you for the cost of trying to salvage this mess with another photographer." The walk to gather her equipment felt like a death march. Lauren's hands shook as she packed her lenses, her flashes, her backup cameras. The guests had mostly returned to their conversations, but she could still feel eyes on her, could still hear the occasional whispered comment about the incompetent photographer. By the time she reached the ornate staircase leading down from the ballroom, tears were streaming down her face. The weight of her camera bag felt impossibly heavy, like it was filled with all her broken dreams instead of equipment. 3 years of building her reputation, gone in one afternoon. The studio rent was due in 2 weeks, and without this payment, she'd lose everything. The marble staircase was steep and grand, designed more for dramatic entrances than practical exits. Lauren's vision was blurred with tears, her hands unsteady from humiliation and caffeine withdrawal. She was halfway down when her ankle twisted in her heels, the same heels she'd bought specifically for this job because she thought they made her look more professional. The fall happened in slow motion. Her camera bag flew open, spilling equipment across the pristine marble steps. Lenses rolled and clattered. Her backup camera bounced with a sickening crack, and papers scattered like confetti. Among the chaos, her wallet had flipped open, and from its worn leather folds, a single photograph fluttered free. It was the photograph, the one constant in her life, the only connection to a past she couldn't remember. The edges were soft with age, the colors slightly faded, but the image was clear. A man with kind eyes holding a little girl, both of them laughing at something just outside the frame. On the back, written in a child's careful handwriting, were the words, "Daddy, I love you." Lauren scrambled to gather her scattered belongings, ignoring the curious stares of hotel guests passing by. Her knee was scraped, her pride completely shattered, and now her most precious possession was lying on the cold marble floor of a place where she clearly didn't belong. "Miss, are you all right?" The voice was deep, concerned, and distinctly American. Not the polished accent of old money, but something warmer, more genuine. Lauren looked up through her tears to see a man in his early 50s, extending his hand to help her up. He was well-dressed but not ostentatious, with graying hair and eyes that seemed familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. "I'm fine," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. She accepted his hand and let him pull her to her feet, then immediately began gathering her equipment again. "Here, let me help," he said, kneeling beside her to collect the scattered items. It was then that his gaze fell on the photograph lying face up on the marble. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. The color drained from his face as if he'd seen a ghost, and his hand froze inches from the photograph. Lauren watched as his eyes moved from the image to her face, then back to the image, his breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Where?" His voice cracked, and he had to clear his throat before continuing. "Where did you get this?" Frank Delaney's world tilted on its axis as he stared at the photograph lying on the marble floor. 21 years of carefully constructed emotional walls crumbled in an instant. The image was burned into his memory. He'd taken it himself on a perfect spring afternoon in Lincoln Park, just 3 weeks before his life had shattered into irreparable pieces. "Sir," Lauren's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Are you okay?" He couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The photograph showed him at 31, young and hopeful, holding his 4-year-old daughter Paige as she giggled at something his wife Anna had said from behind the camera. He remembered that day with crystal clarity, the way Paige's curls had caught the sunlight, how she'd insisted on writing the message on the back herself, her tiny fingers gripping the crayon with fierce determination. "This is mine," Lauren said quietly, reaching for the photograph. It's all I have." Frank's hand shot out instinctively, not to take it from her, but to stop her from moving it. He needed to look longer, needed to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. The girl in the photo had Paige's eyes, her smile, even the way she tilted her head and this young woman kneeling beside him. "My God," he whispered, his gaze moving frantically between Lauren's face and the photograph. The green eyes were identical, not similar, identical. The same shade that had reminded him of sea glass, the same eyes that Anna had passed to their daughter. The shape of her face, the way she bit her lower lip when nervous, even the small scar above her left eyebrow. "Where did you get this?" he asked again, his voice stronger now, but trembling with something between hope and terror. Lauren studied his face, clearly unsettled by his reaction. "I've always had it. Since I was little." She paused, glancing around the elegant lobby of his hotel, as if suddenly remembering where they were. "Look, I should go." I've caused enough trouble for one day." "No, wait." Frank stood quickly, his mind racing. "Please, this photograph. The little girl in it. She was my daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Lauren's eyes widened, and she unconsciously took a step back. "Was?" she asked softly. Frank closed his eyes, and suddenly he was back in Millennium Park on that terrible Saturday afternoon 21 years ago. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. One moment Paige had been on the swing, her laughter ringing across the playground, and the next, "Frank, where is she?" Anna's voice, sharp with the first edge of panic. "I thought she was with you." "She was right here," he'd said, turning in a slow circle, his heart beginning to race. "Paige, Paige, honey, where are you?" The playground had been crowded that day, filled with families enjoying the warm spring weather, children everywhere, but none of them his. He'd called her name until his voice was hoarse, had torn through the park like a madman, checking every hiding spot, every bench, every group of kids. By sunset, the police had arrived. By midnight, search teams with dogs were combing every inch of the park and the surrounding neighborhoods. The media had picked up the story by Monday morning. Chicago business leader's daughter vanishes. For weeks, his phone rang constantly with tips from well-meaning strangers and cruel hoaxes from people who had nothing better to do than torture grieving parents. Anna had blamed herself. She'd been taking photographs of the park's spring flowers, had turned away for maybe 30 seconds to adjust her camera settings. 30 seconds, and their entire world had collapsed. "She disappeared," Frank said quietly, opening his eyes to find Lauren watching him with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. "She was 4 years old. We were at the park, and she just vanished. We never found her." Lauren's hand moved instinctively to her throat, a gesture Frank remembered Paige making whenever she was nervous or scared. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, but there was something in her voice, something that suggested she was beginning to understand why this strange man was looking at her like he'd seen a ghost. "How old are you?" Frank asked suddenly. 25? The math was right. If Paige had lived, she would be 25 now. Frank's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone and scrolled to a folder he rarely opened anymore. "This was taken the week before she disappeared," he said, showing Lauren a photo of Paige in their back garden, her dark curls wild around her face as she chased butterflies. Lauren stared at the phone screen for a long moment, then looked up at him with eyes that seemed older than her years. "She looks like she was happy. She was everything," Frank whispered. "Anna, my wife, she never got over it. The guilt ate her alive. She died 2 years later in a car accident, but everyone who knew her suspected." He couldn't finish the sentence. The lobby around them buzzed with activity. Guests checking in, staff moving efficiently through their routines, the low hum of a life continuing as normal. But for Frank, everything had stopped. This young woman with his daughter's eyes was standing in front of him, holding a photograph that should have been buried with Paige's belongings 21 years ago. "I don't remember anything before the orphanage," Lauren said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "I was found wandering the streets when I was 4, couldn't speak, couldn't tell anyone my name or where I came from. They said I was in shock, traumatized. I spent weeks in the hospital before they placed me at St. Teresa's." Frank felt like he might collapse. St. Teresa's, on the south side. You know it. He knew it, because he'd personally donated thousands of dollars to orphanages across Chicago during the search for Paige. It had been Anna's idea. If they couldn't find their own daughter, at least they could help other lost children. St. Teresa's had been one of many institutions that had received their contributions. The woman who ran it, Sister Iris, she was like a mother to me, Lauren continued. She's the one who gave me the name Lauren. Said I reminded her of the flowers in the convent garden. Her voice grew softer. She died when I was 16. Cancer. Frank's mind was reeling. 21 years of wondering, of searching, of slowly dying inside. And here she was. Here she might be. Because he couldn't let himself believe it completely. Not yet. Hope was too dangerous after so many years of disappointment. "You said you don't remember anything," he said carefully. "Nothing at all." Lauren shook her head, then paused. "Sometimes I have dreams. Fragments, really. A man's voice singing. the smell of coffee in the morning, a garden with yellow roses. But the doctors said trauma could cause that kind of memory loss, especially in young children. Yellow roses? Anna had planted yellow roses along their back fence. The spring before Paige disappeared, Frank had to grip the marble banister to steady himself. "I know this sounds impossible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think you might be my daughter." The words hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they could cross. Lauren's face went pale, and she took another step back. "That's crazy," she whispered, but her hand moved unconsciously to the photograph, clutching it against her chest. "Things like that don't happen in real life. 21 years ago, I would have agreed with you," Frank said. "But I've learned that life is stranger and crueler and more miraculous than we ever imagine." He studied her face again, looking for any detail that might contradict what his heart was screaming at him. "Will you let me help you find out the truth?" Lauren stared at Frank Delaney, as if he'd just suggested they sprout wings and fly to the moon. The rational part of her mind, the part that had learned to be suspicious of anyone offering help without strings attached, was screaming warnings. Rich men didn't just offer to help struggling photographers, especially not with wild claims about long-lost daughters. "You think I'm your daughter," she said slowly, testing the words like they might explode in her mouth, based on a photograph and some physical similarities. "I know how it sounds," Frank said, his voice gentle but urgent. "But Lauren, the resemblance isn't just physical. The way you hold that camera, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. Paige used to do the exact same things." Lauren looked down at her battered camera equipment scattered across the marble floor. Her pride was already in shambles from the wedding disaster. She didn't need some wealthy stranger playing games with her emotions too. "Even if that were true, which is a pretty big if, what are you suggesting, that I just, move into your mansion and play happy family?" Frank laughed, but there was no humor in it. "God, no. I'm suggesting we find out the truth. Professionally. I know a private investigator, one of the best in Chicago. DNA tests, background checks, whatever it takes to either prove or disprove what I believe. And why would you do that for a complete stranger?" The question hung between them, as Frank helped her gather the last of her scattered equipment. His hands were steady, but she could see the tremor in them when he handed her a lens that had rolled near his feet. "Because, for 21 years, I've wondered if my daughter was out there somewhere. Wondering why her father never came to find her," he said quietly. "Because I've spent 2 decades blaming myself for losing her, and if there's even a chance." His voice trailed off, but Lauren could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes. It was the kind of pain she recognized, the hollow ache of loss that never quite went away. She'd felt it her entire life, wondering who she really was, where she came from, why nobody had ever come looking for her. "I can't pay for investigators or DNA tests," she said finally. "I can barely pay my rent. I didn't ask you to pay for anything." Frank stood, brushing dust off his expensive suit. "Look, I own this hotel chain. I need a photographer for our corporate materials, marketing campaigns, event documentation. The position comes with a generous salary and benefits." Lauren's suspicious nature kicked into overdrive. "You're offering me a job just like that? 5 minutes after meeting me on the worst day of my professional life? I'm offering you an opportunity, for both of us." Frank's eyes met hers directly. "You get financial stability and the chance to find out who you really are. I get to know if I'm finally going to stop looking for ghosts in every crowd." The offer was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But Lauren's bank account had exactly $47 in it. Her studio rent was due in 12 days, and she'd just lost the biggest client she'd ever had. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "What kind of photography work?" she asked, hating how desperate she sounded. "Hotel interiors, corporate events, guest testimonials, nothing too artistic. I've seen your portfolio online. You're talented enough to make even our conference rooms look interesting." He'd looked up her work. That was either flattering or creepy, and Lauren wasn't sure which. "You researched me. I research everyone who works in my hotels. It's good business." Frank pulled out a business card and handed it to her. "Think about it. Take the weekend, if you're interested. Call my assistant Monday morning." Lauren took the card, noting the embossed gold lettering and the weight of the expensive paper. Delaney Hotels Corporation. Executive Suite. Frank Delaney, CEO. This wasn't some small-time operation. This was serious money. And the investigation, she asked, completely separate from the job offer. Whether you work for me or not, I'd like to pursue the truth about your background, if you're comfortable with that. Lauren studied his face. Looking for signs of deception or hidden motives, all she saw was a man who looked like he'd been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. Why should I trust you? Because you don't have anything left to lose, Frank said gently. And because deep down, you want to know the truth as much as I do. He was right. And they both knew it. Lauren had spent her entire adult life wondering about the family she might have had, the parents who might have loved her, the life that might have been hers if not for whatever trauma had stolen her memories. I'll think about it, she said, pocketing the business card. Frank nodded and started to walk away, then turned back. Lauren, that photograph. Guard it carefully. If my suspicions are right, it might be the key to everything. 3 floors above the lobby, Jenna Delaney stood at the window of the hotel's penthouse suite, watching her husband's interaction with the young woman on the steps below. Even from this distance, she could see the intensity of their conversation, the way Frank's body language had changed from polite concern to something much more focused. She'd been married to Frank for 16 years, long enough to recognize when something had captured his attention completely. It happened rarely, usually only when Simon was involved, or during particularly challenging business negotiations. But this was different. This was personal. Jenna pressed her phone to her ear. Margaret, it's Mrs. Delaney. I need you to find out everything you can about someone. She watched as Frank handed the young woman his business card. A photographer, 20-something, dark hair, was working the Ashford wedding today. Yes, today. I want a full background check by Monday morning. Her assistant's voice crackled through the phone. Of course, Mrs. Delaney. Anything specific you're looking for? Everything. Where she lives, where she went to school, who she associates with. And Margaret, discretion is important here. This information is for my eyes only. Jenna ended the call and continued watching as her husband helped the photographer gather her equipment. There was something about the girl that nagged at her, something familiar that she couldn't quite place. Frank was being too helpful, too concerned for someone he'd supposedly just met. After 16 years of marriage to a man who'd never quite gotten over his first wife and lost daughter, Jenna had developed finely tuned instincts about anything that might threaten the comfortable life she'd built. Frank was wealthy, successful, and respected in Chicago society. More importantly, he was predictable in his grief, trapped by it, but not actively seeking to change his circumstances. This photographer might change that equation. Jenna's phone buzzed with a text from Simon. Mom, can Jake sleep over tonight? His parents are fighting again. She typed back quickly. Of course, sweetheart. Order pizza for dinner. Simon was her ace in the hole, the one thing that guaranteed her position in Frank's life. Frank might not love her the way he'd loved Anna, but he was devoted to their son. He'd never do anything to jeopardize Simon's stability or happiness. Still watching from the window, Jenna saw Frank disappear into the hotel while the photographer walked away, her equipment bag slung over her shoulder and her head down. Whatever had happened between them, it wasn't over. Frank's body language had been too urgent, too hopeful. Jenna had spent too many years building her place in Chicago's social hierarchy to let some random girl with a camera threaten it now. Frank's hotels generated millions in revenue annually, and as his wife, she had access to that world of influence and luxury. She sat on charity boards, hosted fundraising galas, and wielded the kind of social power that could make or break careers. If this photographer posed a threat to that life, Jenna would handle it the same way she'd handled every other challenge to her position, quickly, efficiently, and with plausible deniability. Her phone rang again. Frank's ringtone. Darling, she answered, her voice warm with practiced affection. How was your day? Interesting, Frank said, and something in his tone made her grip the phone tighter. Very interesting. I'll tell you about it over dinner. I'm looking forward to it, Jenna lied smoothly. I love you. Love you too, he replied automatically. But Jenna had been married to him long enough to hear the distraction in his voice. As she hung up, Jenna's reflection stared back at her from the window. Perfectly styled blonde hair, expertly applied makeup, designer clothing that whispered rather than shouted wealth. She'd worked too hard to become Mrs. Frank Delaney to let anyone take that away from her. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. Lauren had been working at Delaney Hotels for exactly 2 weeks when the first memory hit her like a freight train. She was in Frank's home office, photographing the space for a corporate brochure about executive retreats, when he walked in carrying his usual afternoon coffee. The rich aroma of French roast mixed with something else. A cologne that was expensive but not overpowering, masculine but warm. The scent wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. And suddenly she was 4 years old again, being lifted high into strong arms that smelled exactly the same way. Higher, Daddy, higher. The memory was so vivid, so real, that Lauren actually gasped and stepped backward, bumping into the mahogany desk behind her. "Are you all right?" Frank asked, immediately setting down his coffee and moving toward her. "I'm fine," Lauren said quickly, but her hands were shaking as she lowered her camera. "Just dizzy for a second. Low blood sugar, probably." Frank's eyes searched her face with the intensity she'd grown accustomed to over the past 2 weeks. He did that a lot. Studied her when he thought she wasn't looking, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that had been tormenting him for years. "There's fruit in the kitchen," he offered. "Agnes can fix you something." Agnes, the woman who'd been working for the Delaney family for 25 years, who moved through the house like a ghost, who always seemed to be watching Lauren with an expression that bordered on recognition. It made Lauren uncomfortable, the way the older woman's eyes would follow her movements, as if she was seeing something that Lauren herself couldn't understand. "I'm okay," Lauren insisted, raising her camera again. "Let's finish this shoot." But Frank didn't move. Instead, he picked up a silver frame from his desk, one Lauren had been carefully avoiding in her shots, because it held a photograph of him with his current family. Jenna, perfectly styled and smiling, stood beside him while a teenage boy with Frank's eyes grinned at the camera. "This is Simon," Frank said, noticing her gaze. "He's 15, good kid, despite having to put up with his old man." Lauren nodded politely, but something about the boy's face triggered another flash of memory. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking. She'd been having a lot of those lately. Moments where she thought she recognized something in Frank's mannerisms, in the way he moved through his house, in the sound of his laugh echoing from another room. "He looks like you," she said, which was true. Simon had inherited Frank's dark hair and strong jawline, though his eyes were lighter, more like his mother's. "People say that?" Frank replaced the frame carefully. "He's at school right now, but you'll meet him eventually. He's curious about our new photographer." The way he said "our" made Lauren's chest tighten. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd been trying to maintain professional distance, to treat this like any other job. But Frank made that difficult. He was kind without being patronizing, generous without making her feel like charity, and there was something about being in his presence that felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. "Mr. Delaney?" Lauren started, then stopped. She'd been wanting to ask about the investigation he'd mentioned, but every time she worked up the courage, something held her back. "Frank," he corrected gently. "And what were you going to say? The investigation you mentioned, have you—" "I hired Philip Hartman 3 days after we met," Frank said. "He's good, discreet and thorough. He's already started looking into the records from St. Teresa's, trying to track down anyone who might remember your arrival there." Lauren felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with hope. "And it's early yet. These things take time, especially when we're dealing with records from over 20 years ago." Frank moved to the window, looking out at the garden where late afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees. Sister Iris kept meticulous records, but the church bureaucracy moves slowly. Philip's working on getting access to the files. The garden, Lauren had photographed it yesterday for the luxury estate living section of the corporate materials, but standing in it had felt strange, like déjà vu wrapped in autumn leaves. There were yellow roses along the back fence, their blooms faded now with the changing season, but still beautiful in their determination to hang on. "Was she always a nun?" Lauren asked suddenly. Frank turned from the window. "Who?" "Sister Iris. You said she kept meticulous records like you knew her." For a moment, Frank looked uncomfortable. Anna and I donated to several orphanages after Paige disappeared. St. Teresa's was one of them. I met Sister Iris a few times during charity events." The explanation made sense. but something in his tone suggested there was more to it. Lauren was learning to read Frank's expressions. And right now, he looked like a man who was carefully choosing his words. Before she could press further, footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by a woman's voice calling out, "Frank, are you home?" Jenna appeared in the doorway moments later, dressed in the kind of effortlessly elegant outfit that probably cost more than Lauren's monthly salary. Her smile was perfectly friendly, but Lauren had been on the receiving end of enough fake smiles to recognize one immediately. "Jenna, this is Lauren Spencer, our new photographer," Frank said. "Lauren, my wife, Jenna. We've heard so much about you," Jenna said, extending a manicured hand. "Frank's been very impressed with your work." "Thank you," Lauren replied, accepting the handshake and trying not to wince at the woman's grip, which was just a little too firm to be casual. "I hope you don't mind," Jenna continued, "but I took the liberty of looking at some of your previous work online. You have quite an interesting background." Lauren felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Interesting how? Oh, you know, the orphanage, the scholarship to art school, building your business from nothing. It's very inspiring." The way she said inspiring made it sound like something distasteful. Lauren glanced at Frank, who was frowning at his wife with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Jenna," he said quietly. "What? I'm just saying it's admirable how she's overcome her circumstances." Jenna's smile never wavered. "Not everyone gets a second chance in life." The words hit Lauren like a slap. She'd spent her entire adult life working twice as hard as everyone else, proving that her background didn't define her capabilities. But here was this woman, with her perfect life and inherited privilege, making it sound like Lauren was some kind of charity case. "I should finish this shoot," Lauren said stiffly, raising her camera again. "Of course, don't let me interrupt." Jenna moved to stand beside Frank, slipping her arm through his in a gesture that looked casual but felt possessive. "Frank, don't forget we have dinner with the Hendersons tonight." "I remember," Frank said, but his attention remained on Lauren, who was now focusing intently on her camera settings to avoid looking at either of them. "I'll leave you to it then," Jenna said. "Lauren, it was lovely meeting you. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." As her footsteps faded down the hallway, Lauren felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. But when she looked up, Frank was still watching her with that same intense expression. "She didn't mean anything by that," he said quietly. "Didn't she?" Lauren adjusted her lens, focusing on a bookshelf across the room. "It's fine. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be." The gentleness in his voice almost broke her composure. In 2 weeks of working for him, Frank had never once made her feel inferior or out of place. He treated her like an equal, like someone whose opinions mattered, like someone worth listening to. It was a novel experience. From somewhere in the house, Lauren heard a sound that made her freeze. A low, melodic humming. Frank was absently humming under his breath as he sorted through papers on his desk, and the tune was hauntingly familiar. She'd heard it before, in dreams that felt more like memories, in quiet moments when her mind wandered to places she couldn't quite reach. "Hush now, baby. Don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby." The words came from nowhere, unbidden and clear as if someone had whispered them directly into her ear. Lauren's camera slipped in her hands, and she had to grab it quickly to keep from dropping it. "That song," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What song is that?" Frank stopped humming and looked up at her. "I don't know. Just something I've always hummed, I guess." "Why?" I think I know it. From somewhere." Their eyes met across the room, and Lauren saw her own confusion reflected in his face. How could she know a song that he hummed absently? How could his cologne trigger memories of being lifted by strong arms? How could this house, this garden, this man feel so familiar when logic insisted they were strangers? "Lauren," Frank said softly, "do you believe in destiny?" Before she could answer, Agnes appeared in the doorway with a tea service, her weathered face carefully neutral, but her eyes darting between Lauren and Frank with unmistakable concern. "Your afternoon tea, Mr. Delaney?" she said, her voice carrying the slight Irish accent that had probably been much stronger in her youth. "Thank you, Agnes." Frank's attention shifted to the housekeeper. "Agnes, this is Lauren Spencer. She's been photographing the house." Agnes nodded politely, but Lauren caught the way the older woman's hands trembled slightly as she set down the tea tray. "Pleasure to meet you, miss." "Likewise," Lauren replied. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't their first meeting, at least not from Agnes's perspective. As the housekeeper turned to leave, Lauren called out impulsively, "Agnes, have we met before?" The older woman paused, her back still turned. "I don't believe so, miss. I have one of those faces. I suppose people often think they recognize me." But when Agnes finally turned around, Lauren saw something in her eyes that looked suspiciously like guilt. Agnes Wallace had been carrying secrets for 21 years, and they were killing her one sleepless night at a time. She stood in her small apartment above the Delaney family's detached garage, staring at the collection of newspaper clippings, photographs, and documents she'd hidden in a shoebox beneath her bed. The box contained 21 years of watching from the shadows, of anonymous donations to St. Teresa's orphanage, of tracking a little girl's progress through quarterly reports from Sister Iris. The girl who was now a woman, working in the very house where she belonged. Agnes's hands shook as she lifted the top newspaper clipping, a yellowed piece from the Chicago Tribune dated May 15, 2004. Local businessman's daughter still missing after 3 weeks. Below the headline was a photograph of 4-year-old Paige Delaney, all dark curls and bright green eyes, the same eyes that now looked through Lauren Spencer's camera lens. The guilt was a physical thing, sitting in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. Every day she watched Frank's face when Lauren was near, saw the hope and desperate recognition there, and knew she could end his suffering with a single conversation. But she also knew that the truth would destroy more than it would heal. The memory of that terrible day in Millennium Park was as clear now as it had been 21 years ago. Agnes had been following them that afternoon, though neither Frank nor Anna knew it. Mrs. Anna had been struggling with what the doctors politely called anxiety issues since the baby blues that never quite went away after Paige's birth. She'd started leaving the house at odd hours, forgetting appointments, sometimes not remembering conversations they'd had the day before. Frank was working longer hours to cope with his wife's condition, which meant Agnes often found herself becoming an unofficial guardian, watching the family from a respectful distance to ensure little Paige was safe. She'd been sitting on a bench 30 yards away when it happened. Anna was photographing the spring flowers, completely absorbed in adjusting her camera settings. Paige was on the swing set, pumping her little legs and calling out, "Look at me, Mama. Look how high I can go." Agnes saw the woman approach the playground before Anna did. Blonde, expensively dressed, moving with purpose toward the swings. She'd knelt down beside Paige's swing and said something that made the little girl stop pumping her legs. "Your daddy sent me to get you," the woman had said, her voice carrying clearly across the playground. "He's waiting in the car. There's been an accident." Agnes had started moving then, her 60-year-old legs carrying her faster than they had in years. But she wasn't fast enough. By the time she reached the swing set, Paige was already walking hand in hand with the woman toward the parking area, her face confused and frightened. Agnes had followed them to a black sedan where 2 men waited. She'd watched in horror as they bundled the crying child into the back seat. The blonde woman, who Agnes now knew was Jenna Hollis, Frank's business associate and secret lover, had climbed into the passenger seat. Agnes had done the only thing she could think of. She'd followed them in her own car. The drive had taken them to an abandoned warehouse on the south side. Agnes had parked across the street and watched through her windshield as the men carried a now silent Paige into the building. The child wasn't struggling anymore, which meant they'd probably drugged her. Agnes had sat in that car for 3 hours, watching and waiting and praying, before she'd finally worked up the courage to call the police. But as she'd reached for her phone, the men had emerged from the warehouse alone. "It's done," she'd heard one of them say to Jenna. "Kid won't remember anything. Gave her enough to keep her quiet for hours. And afterward, river, quick and clean." Agnes had nearly vomited right there in her car. These people were planning to murder a 4-year-old child because she was an obstacle to Jenna's relationship with Frank, the moment the sedan had pulled away. Agnes had broken into that warehouse like a woman possessed. She'd found Paige unconscious in a back room, barely breathing, her little body limp and cold. Agnes had wrapped her in her own coat and carried her to the car, her heart hammering with terror and adrenaline. But she couldn't take Paige home. Jenna would know someone had interfered, and Agnes had no doubt the woman would find a way to silence both of them permanently. Jenna came from a powerful political family, the kind of people who could make problems disappear. so Agnes had driven to St. Teresa's orphanage, where Sister Iris had been a friend of her late mother's. She'd begged the nun to take the child, to hide her, to ask no questions. She'd explained that the little girl was in danger, that people were trying to hurt her, that she needed a new identity and complete protection. Sister Iris had taken one look at the unconscious child and agreed. Agnes had provided false documentation, papers that claimed Paige was the abandoned daughter of a drug addict who died of an overdose. She'd used contacts from her late husband's work at the city clerk's office to create a believable backstory. The child became Lauren Spencer, named after St. Lawrence, the patron saint of protection. For 21 years, Agnes had sent anonymous donations to ensure Lauren was well cared for. She'd attended every school play, every graduation, every important moment in the girl's life, always from the back of the crowd, always unnoticed. And she'd watched Frank slowly die inside, day by day, year by year, never knowing his daughter was alive and growing up just across the city. Now, holding the weight of those memories, Agnes stared out her apartment window at the main house where Lauren was probably finishing her photography work. The irony was almost unbearable. The daughter had come home on her own, drawn by forces Agnes didn't pretend to understand. But Jenna was still there, still dangerous, still willing to do whatever it took to protect the life she'd built on the foundation of a child's disappearance. Agnes had been watching Jenna's behavior since Lauren started working for the family, and she recognized the signs. The way Jenna's smile never reached her eyes when Lauren was mentioned. The subtle questions about the new photographer's background, the phone calls Agnes had overheard, requesting background checks and private investigations. Jenna was planning something. Agnes could feel it in the air like electricity before a storm. A knock at her apartment door made Agnes jump. Scattering the newspaper clippings across her small table, she quickly gathered them up, shoving everything back into the shoebox and sliding it under her bed. "Agnes!" Frank's voice came through the door. "Are you up there?" Agnes smoothed her gray hair and opened the door to find Frank standing at the bottom of the stairs. Still in his business suit from the day's work, his face looked haggard, older than his 52 years. "Mr. Delaney, is everything all right? Can I come up? I need to talk to someone, and you've always been..." "Of course." Agnes stepped aside to let him into her modest living space. "Shall I make tea? That would be nice." As Agnes busied herself with the kettle, she could feel Frank's eyes on her back. She'd known this man for 25 years, had watched him build his business empire, had seen him fall in love with Anna, had grieved with him when Paige disappeared, and when Anna died. She probably knew him better than anyone alive, including his current wife. "Agnes," Frank said quietly, "do you believe people can sense things? Family connections. I mean, even when they don't understand them logically." Agnes's hand stilled on the tea canister. "What do you mean, sir?" "Lauren, there's something about her." Frank ran his hands through his hair. "I know it sounds crazy, but being around her feels like remembering something I thought I'd lost forever." The kettle began to whistle, a sharp sound that seemed to cut through the small apartment. Agnes turned off the heat and poured the water, using the familiar ritual to steady her hands. "She's a lovely girl," Agnes said carefully. "Very talented with that camera of hers." "It's more than that." Frank accepted the cup of tea she offered him. "The way she moves, the expression she makes, even the way she holds her head when she's concentrating. It's like watching Paige grow up and fast forward." Agnes sat down across from him, her own teacup trembling slightly in her hands. "Mr. Delaney, I've hired an investigator," Frank continued, "to look into her background, to see if there's any connection to Paige. I know it's probably just wishful thinking, but I can't shake the feeling that she's what? That she's my daughter." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Agnes stared into her tea, watching the steam rise and dissipate, thinking about 21 years of keeping quiet, of protecting a secret that had saved a child's life, but destroyed a father's heart. "And what if she is?" Agnes asked quietly. Frank looked up at her, hope and terror warring in his expression. "Then everything changes. Everything. And Mrs. Jenna, Simon, what happens to them?" Frank's face darkened. Jenna and I married for practical reasons, companionship, shared goals, social compatibility. It's been a good partnership, but it's never been..." He trailed off. "Simon is different. He's my son. and I love him. But if Lauren is really Paige, you'd have to tell him he has a sister. I'd have to tell everyone the truth, that for 21 years, I've been living a half-life, going through the motions, never quite whole. Agnes set down her teacup with hands that were no longer steady. The weight of her secret was becoming unbearable, but the truth could destroy this family just as surely as the lie had preserved it. "Mr. Delaney," she said slowly, "what would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted had been keeping secrets from you? Important secrets that affected your family?" Frank studied her face. "That depends on why they kept the secrets. Were they trying to protect someone, or were they trying to hurt someone?" "Protect? Then I'd probably forgive them," Frank said. "Eventually. But I'd also want to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt." Agnes nodded and stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the main house. In the distance, she could see Lauren's car pulling out of the driveway, her workday finished. "Mr. Delaney," Agnes said without turning around, "if that investigator of yours needs someone who was actually there the day Paige disappeared, someone who saw things the police never knew about, you have my number." Behind her, she heard Frank's teacup rattle against its saucer. "Agnes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what aren't you telling me?" Agnes closed her eyes and made a decision that had been 21 years in the making. "Everything," she whispered back. "I haven't told you everything." Philip Hartman had been a private investigator for 30 years, long enough to know that the truth usually came wrapped in ugly packaging. But as he stared at the DNA analysis results spread across his desk, even he was unprepared for the magnitude of what he'd uncovered. The lab had been thorough. Hair samples collected from Lauren's coffee cup at the Delaney offices. Comparative samples from Frank's personal items. The science was irrefutable. Lauren Spencer was indeed Paige Delaney, kidnapped 21 years ago and presumed dead. Philip reached for his phone to call Frank, then hesitated. This wasn't the kind of news you delivered over the phone. This was the kind of revelation that changed lives forever, for better or worse. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in Frank's private office at the hotel, watching a man's entire world realign itself with the delivery of a simple manila envelope. "Are you certain?" Frank asked for the third time, his hands shaking as he held the lab results. "DNA doesn't lie," Philip said gently. "Lauren Spencer is your daughter. The probability is 97%. Frank set the papers down and walked to the window, his shoulders rigid with the weight of 21 years of grief suddenly transformed into something else entirely. "My God, she's been alive all this time. All this time, I thought." "There's more," Philip said quietly. "The records from St. Teresa's, I managed to get access to Sister Iris's private files. Lauren was brought to the orphanage on May 15th, 2004. The same day Paige disappeared. The paperwork claimed she was found wandering the streets, but Sister Iris kept separate notes." Frank turned from the window. "What kind of notes?" "Personal observations. She suspected Lauren had been deliberately placed at the orphanage by someone who wanted to protect her. The official story about finding her on the streets never quite added up. A 4-year-old child, traumatized and nonverbal, but otherwise well cared for. No signs of long-term neglect or abuse. Someone saved her," Frank said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "Someone took her from whoever kidnapped her and brought her to safety. That's my theory, but here's where it gets complicated." Philip pulled out another folder. "I've been looking into everyone who had access to your family around the time of the kidnapping. Staff, business associates, social contacts. And there's something you need to know about the timeline." Frank sat down heavily in his leather chair. "What timeline?" 3 weeks before Paige disappeared, your current wife Jenna was already making inquiries about wedding venues. The silence in the room was deafening. Frank's face went completely white. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Jenna and I didn't start dating until 6 months after Anna died. We didn't get engaged until—" "Frank," Philip's voice was gentle but firm. "Jenna Hollis had reserved the grand ballroom at the Palmer House for a wedding on June 15th, 2005. The reservation was made on April 22nd, 2004, 3 weeks before your daughter disappeared. A full year before Anna died." Frank stared at the investigator as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your wife was planning to marry you before your first wife died. Before your daughter disappeared, Which means she knew. Frank's voice was barely audible. She knew what was going to happen. Philip nodded grimly. There's more. Financial records show Jenna made several large cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to Paige's disappearance, and phone records from that time period show multiple calls to numbers registered to known criminals, men who specialized in making problems disappear. The office felt like it was spinning around Frank. 21 years of marriage to a woman who had orchestrated the destruction of his first family. 21 years of grieving for a daughter who was alive. 21 years of believing in a lie so massive it defied comprehension. Where is she now? Frank asked suddenly. Jenna. No, Lauren. Where is Lauren right now? Philip checked his watch. According to her schedule, she should be finishing up a photo shoot at your Lake Forest property. Frank was already reaching for his car keys. We need to get her somewhere safe if Jenna finds out we know the truth. Frank, wait. Philip stood up. We need to be smart about this. Jenna's managed to keep this secret for 21 years. She's dangerous, and she's connected if we move too fast. She's planning something. Frank interrupted. I can feel it. The way she's been watching Lauren. The questions she's been asking. We have to... Frank's office door opened without warning. Margaret, his assistant, stood in the doorway looking flustered. Mr. Delaney, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Delaney is here. She says it's urgent. Before Frank could respond, Jenna swept into the office like a force of nature. She was perfectly put together as always, but there was something different about her energy, something predatory. Philip, she said, acknowledging the investigator with a cool nod. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Mrs. Delaney, Philip replied carefully, but Frank could see him sliding the DNA results into his briefcase. Frank, darling, Jenna said, moving to kiss her husband's cheek. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I need to discuss some arrangements for this evening. What arrangements? Frank asked, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. The photo shoot at Rockcliffe Point. I thought it would be wonderful to get some family portraits done while Lauren is still working with us. You know how lovely the light is there at sunset. Frank felt ice form in his veins. Rockcliffe Point was an isolated location 30 miles outside the city, accessible only by a single winding road. It was romantic and scenic, which made it perfect for photography. It was also completely private, which made it perfect for other things. I don't recall discussing any family photo shoot, Frank said carefully. Oh, it was Simon's idea, actually. He's been asking when he'd get to meet our talented photographer properly. Jenna's smile was brilliant and completely terrifying. I've already called Lauren and arranged everything. She's meeting us there at 6 o'clock. Frank glanced at Philip, who was watching Jenna with the careful attention of a man who'd learned to recognize predators. That seems very... sudden. Well, you know how teenagers are. When Simon gets an idea in his head. Jenna laughed, but the sound was hollow. Besides, Lauren mentioned she's been having some interesting dreams lately. Memories surfacing. I thought a change of scenery might help clarify things for her. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jenna knew, somehow, she'd discovered what they'd learned about Lauren's identity, and now she was moving to eliminate the problem permanently. Where's Simon now? Frank asked. Getting ready, of course. He's very excited about the photo session. Jenna moved toward the door. I should go prepare as well. We want to look our best for posterity, don't we? After she left, the silence in Frank's office was oppressive. She knows, Philip said quietly. How? I don't know, but it doesn't matter now. We have maybe 2 hours before that photo shoot. Frank was already dialing Lauren's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again, same result. She's not answering. Philip was gathering his files. We need backup, police, security, whatever it takes. We can't involve the police yet, if we're wrong about this. Frank. Philip's voice was sharp. Your wife just arranged to take your newly discovered daughter to an isolated location for a photo shoot. The same wife who orchestrated your daughter's kidnapping 21 years ago. We're not wrong. Frank stared at his phone, willing Lauren to call back. The daughter he'd mourned for 2 decades was alive, and now she was walking into a trap set by the woman who'd destroyed his family once before. What kind of monster does that? Frank whispered. What kind of person lives with someone for 21 years, shares their bed, raises their child, all while knowing the kind who's capable of murder, Philip said bluntly. which is exactly what she's planning to do at Rockcliffe Point. Frank grabbed his jacket. Then we better get there first. As they headed for the door, Frank's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Frank, it's Agnes. Meet me at the service road behind Rockcliffe Point. I have something you need to know about that night 21 years ago. Come alone. Philip read the message over Frank's shoulder. A trap. No, Frank said, thinking about the look in Agnes's eyes the night before when she'd said she hadn't told him everything. Agnes knows something. She's always known something. Then we're walking into a situation with at least 3 people who've been keeping secrets for 21 years. Frank started the car. 4 people. Lauren's been keeping secrets too, even from herself. But after tonight, all the secrets come out, or we all end up at the bottom of that cliff. Frank pulled out of the parking garage with tires squealing. That's not going to happen. I've already lost my daughter once. I'm not losing her again. Agnes Wallace sat in her small Honda Civic on the service road behind Rockcliffe Point, her weathered hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. The manila envelope on the passenger seat contained 21 years of evidence. Photographs, bank statements, phone records, and a detailed account of everything she'd witnessed that terrible day in 2004. She'd spent the morning gathering everything she'd hidden over the years, knowing that tonight would finally end the charade. Jenna's phone call to Lauren that afternoon had been the final straw. Agnes had been dusting in the hallway when she'd overheard it. Jenna's voice honey-sweet, but with an undertone that made Agnes's blood run cold. Lauren, darling, I hope you don't mind a last-minute request, but we'd love some family portraits at Rockcliffe Point this evening. The light there is simply magical at sunset. Agnes had recognized the location immediately. Rockcliffe Point was where Jenna had taken her lovers before marrying Frank, where she went when she needed complete privacy. It was also where someone could disappear forever without anyone asking too many questions. The sound of an approaching car made Agnes look up. Frank's black Mercedes pulled up behind her, and she watched in the rearview mirror as he got out with another man. Tall, serious-looking, probably the private investigator she'd heard him mention. Agnes climbed out of her car and walked toward them, the manila envelope clutched against her chest like armor. Agnes, Frank said, his face drawn with worry. Thank God you're here. Jenna's planning something terrible, isn't she? Yes, sir, she is. Agnes looked between Frank and the investigator. But it's not the first time. And if we don't stop her tonight, Lauren will end up like her mother. Her mother, Frank's voice cracked. Agnes, what are you talking about? Agnes opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph. Anna Delaney's car after the accident that killed her. Mrs. Anna didn't crash because she was depressed. Mr. Delaney, she crashed because someone tampered with her brakes. Philip Hartman, the investigator, stepped forward. Do you have proof of that? I have something better. I have a witness. Agnes pulled out another document. A mechanic who worked on Mrs. Anna's car the day before she died. He's been living in Mexico for 20 years, too scared to come forward, but I've been in contact with him since the day you hired that investigator. Frank took the paper with shaking hands. It was a sworn affidavit, dated just 3 days ago, detailing how the mechanic had been paid $10,000 in cash to loosen the brake lines on Anna Delaney's BMW. The person who paid him, Agnes continued, a blonde woman who said she was Mrs. Anna's sister, except Mrs. Anna didn't have a sister. Jenna, Frank whispered. Yes, sir. Jenna killed your wife, and she would have killed your daughter too. If I hadn't. Agnes's voice broke, and for a moment she looked every one of her 71 years. If you hadn't what? Philip asked gently. Agnes pulled out the final document, a hospital record from St. Teresa's orphanage dated May 15, 2004. If I hadn't followed the men who took Paige and rescued her before they could finish the job. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Frank stared at Agnes as if she'd suddenly sprouted wings. You saved her, he breathed. You've known all this time that she was alive and you saved her. I did what I had to do, Agnes said, tears streaming down her face. But I've regretted keeping quiet every single day since, watching you grieve, watching you marry that monster, watching you blame yourself. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I was terrified of what she'd do if she found out Paige was still alive. Philip was studying the hospital records. These medical notes. They mentioned trauma consistent with drugging, and look at this. He pointed to a line in the report. The examining physician noted that the child had been recently bathed and dressed in clean clothes, which was inconsistent with someone who'd been living on the streets. "Because I cleaned her up before bringing her to Sister Iris," Agnes explained. "She was unconscious when I found her in that warehouse, barely breathing. The men who took her had given her something to keep her quiet." Frank's face went white. "A warehouse, Agnes. Where exactly did this happen?" Agnes pulled out a map and pointed to a location on the south side. "Here, an abandoned building that's been torn down since then. But I watched them carry her inside. And I heard them talking about," she swallowed hard, "about dumping her body in the river afterward." "Jesus Christ," Philip muttered. "She planned to murder a 4-year-old child. And she would have succeeded if Agnes hadn't been there," Frank said, looking at the woman who'd been part of his household for 25 years with new eyes. "But why didn't you tell me after Anna died? After the danger had passed?" "Because the danger never passed." Agnes's voice was sharp with fear. "Jenna married you 6 months later. She was in your house, raising your son, building her life on the foundation of everything she'd stolen from you. If she'd discovered that Paige was alive, she would have tried again," Frank finished. "And this time, she would have made sure there were no witnesses." Philip checked his watch. "It's 5:30. That photo shoot is supposed to start in half an hour." Frank pulled out his phone and tried Lauren's number again. Still no answer. "Agnes, do you know if Simon is really involved in this? Or is Jenna using him?" Agnes's expression grew even more worried. "I've been watching Master Simon closely since this afternoon. He seems genuinely excited about meeting Lauren properly, but..." She paused. "Mrs. Jenna's been filling his head with stories about gold diggers and opportunists trying to take advantage of the family fortune. She's turning him against Lauren," Frank realized, "making him think she's a threat to his inheritance. Worse than that," Agnes said quietly. "She's making him think he needs to protect the family. You know how loyal that boy is, how much he loves you. If she convinces him that Lauren is dangerous, he'd do anything to protect his father," Philip finished, "including helping to eliminate a threat he doesn't understand." Frank felt sick. His son, innocent, loving Simon, was being manipulated into becoming an accessory to murder, just like Frank himself had been manipulated for 21 years, living with the woman who destroyed everything he'd held dear. "There's something else," Agnes said, pulling out the last document in her envelope. "Phone records from this afternoon. Mrs. Jenna made 3 calls after she left your office. 1 to Master Simon's school, asking them to release him early. 1 to a number registered to a private security company." "Security company?" Frank frowned. "The kind that doesn't ask questions about what they're securing," Philip said grimly. "Mercenaries, basically." "What was the 3rd call?" "To Lauren's phone. But it wasn't just to arrange the photo shoot." Agnes handed Frank a printed transcript. "I may be old, Mr. Delaney, but I know how to use technology when I need to. This is a recording of that conversation." Frank read the transcript, his blood growing colder with each line. "Jenna, Lauren, darling, I hope you don't mind a last-minute request." Lauren, "Of course not, Mrs. Delaney. What can I do for you?" Jenna, "We'd love some family portraits at Rockcliffe Point this evening." "Just the immediate family." Lauren, "That sounds lovely. What time works best?" Jenna, 6 o'clock would be perfect. And Lauren, "Bring everything you have with you. All your equipment, your personal belongings. We want this to be a comprehensive session." Lauren, "Everything. That seems like a lot for a simple portrait session." Jenna, "Oh, you never know what inspiration might strike. Besides, after tonight you might not need your equipment anymore." Frank looked up from the transcript. "She's not planning to let Lauren leave that cliff alive." "No, sir, she's not." Agnes wiped her eyes with a tissue. "But we're not going to let her succeed this time." Philip was already moving toward his car. "I'm calling for backup, police, FBI if necessary. This has gone beyond family drama. This is conspiracy to commit murder." "Wait," Frank called after him. "If we bring in law enforcement now, Jenna will know we're on to her. She might panic and hurt Lauren before they can get there." "Then what do you suggest?" Frank looked at Agnes, who was standing straighter now, her face set with determination despite her tears. "Agnes, you've been protecting my daughter for 21 years. Are you willing to help me save her one more time?" "Yes, sir. Whatever it takes." Frank pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts. "Philip, I need you to call the police. But tell them to stay back unless we signal for help, Agnes. I need you to get to that cliff by the back route you showed us. If things go wrong, Lauren will need an escape route. What are you going to do? Philip asked. Frank found the number he was looking for and hit dial. I'm going to call my wife and tell her I'll be late for our photo session. Then I'm going to make sure she never hurts my family again. As the phone rang, Frank looked out at Rockcliffe Point in the distance, where the setting sun was painting the sky blood red. Jenna, he said when she answered. It's me. There's been a delay at the office, but I'll be there as soon as I can. Don't start without me. Of course not, darling. Jenna's voice was honey sweet through the phone. We're all just getting ready for our close-up. The line went dead, and Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She knows we're coming, he said quietly. Then we better hurry, Agnes replied, already heading for her car. Before she finishes what she started 21 years ago. Lauren arrived at Rockcliffe Point 15 minutes early, her camera equipment loaded into 2 heavy cases in the back of her Honda. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the scenic overlook, and she had to admit that Jenna had been right about the lighting. It was absolutely perfect for photography. What wasn't perfect was the feeling in her gut that something was very, very wrong. She'd tried calling Frank twice on the drive over to confirm details about the shoot, but both calls had gone straight to voicemail. That was unusual for him. In the month she'd been working for the family, Frank had always been immediately available, almost obsessively so. Lauren parked near the cliff's edge and began unloading her equipment. Rockcliffe Point was beautiful but isolated, a narrow promontory that jutted out over Lake Michigan, accessible only by a single winding road through the forest. The nearest house was at least 5 miles away. It was the kind of place that made you feel completely alone in the world, perfect for family portraits, also perfect for other things. She was setting up her tripod when she heard cars approaching. 2 vehicles, Jenna's white BMW and a black SUV she didn't recognize. Lauren waved as Jenna got out of the BMW, followed by Simon, who looked unusually subdued for a teenager about to have his picture taken. Lauren, darling, Jenna called out, her voice carrying across the clifftop with false cheer. Thank you so much for accommodating our last-minute request. Of course, Lauren replied, but she was watching the black SUV. 2 men in dark suits had gotten out and were positioning themselves near the tree line. Not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to control access to the only road out. Where's Frank? Lauren asked. Oh, he's running a bit late. You know how business calls can drag on. Jenna moved closer, her smile never wavering. But I thought we could start with some shots of Simon and me, and then add Frank when he arrives. Simon walked over to Lauren's equipment setup, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Cool cameras, he said, but his voice lacked enthusiasm. Mom says you're really talented. Your mom is very kind, Lauren replied, studying the boy's face. Up close, the resemblance to Frank was even stronger, but there was something in Simon's eyes, a confusion that suggested he didn't entirely understand why he was here. Simon's been asking about you, Jenna said, moving to stand behind her son with her hands on his shoulders. Haven't you, sweetheart? Yeah, Simon said, but he was looking at Lauren with an expression she couldn't quite read. Mom says you've been having some interesting dreams lately, about our family. Lauren felt a chill run down her spine. She'd never mentioned her dreams to Jenna. In fact, she'd barely mentioned them to Frank. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, come now. Jenna's voice took on a sharper edge. Frank told me about your little conversations, about how familiar everything feels, about the memories that keep surfacing. Lauren set down her camera and took a step back. Something was happening here, something that had nothing to do with family portraits. Mrs. Delaney, I think maybe we should wait for Frank before... Before what? Jenna interrupted. Before we discuss who you really are. The question hit Lauren like a physical blow. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Jenna moved closer, and Lauren could see something predatory in her perfectly made-up face. Lauren Spencer, 25 years old, found wandering the streets at age 4 with no memory of her past, raised at St. Teresa's orphanage by the saintly Sister Iris. Lauren's heart started pounding. How did Jenna know all of this? She'd never shared the details of her background with anyone in the Delaney family except Frank. That's all public record, Lauren said carefully. If you did a background check. Oh, I did much more than a background check. Jenna pulled out her phone and showed Lauren a photograph. It was the DNA test results. Amazing what money can buy, isn't it? Access to private medical files, confidential test results, sealed adoption records. Lauren stared at the phone screen, her mind reeling. The results showed a 99.97% probability that she was related to Frank Delaney, that she was his daughter. That's impossible, Lauren whispered. Is it? Jenna's laugh was cold and sharp. Tell me, Lauren, what do you remember about the day you disappeared? I didn't disappear. I was abandoned. You were kidnapped, Jenna said matter-of-factly. By men I hired. From a playground in Millennium Park while your father was buying ice cream and your mother was taking pictures of flowers. The words hit Lauren like bullets. Fragments of memory began exploding in her mind. A playground, a woman with blonde hair kneeling beside her swing, the smell of fear and confusion, strong hands carrying her away from everything safe and familiar. You, Lauren breathed. It was you. Very good. Jenna clapped her hands slowly. Mockingly, I was wondering when you'd start remembering. The doctors said the trauma might have permanently damaged your memory, but apparently they were wrong. Simon was staring at his mother with growing horror. Mom, what are you talking about? Kidnapped who? Your half-sister, sweetheart, Jenna said casually, as if she was discussing the weather. Paige Delaney, your father's daughter from his first marriage, the little girl who stood between me and everything I wanted. Half-sister, Simon's voice cracked. But she's dead. She disappeared when I was little, you told me. I told you what you needed to hear. Jenna's attention was still focused on Lauren, who was backing slowly toward her car. Just like I told your father what he needed to hear, that she was gone forever, that he needed to move on, that he needed someone like me to help him heal. Lauren's hand found her car door handle. You're insane. Am I? I prefer to think of myself as practical. Jenna gestured to the men by the SUV, who began moving closer. I wanted Frank Delaney. He was wealthy, successful, politically connected, everything I needed to build the life I deserved. But he was also devastatingly in love with his wife and obsessed with his daughter. So I removed the obstacles. You killed my mother, Lauren said, the memories flooding back now in a torrent of pain and rage. Anna was weak, unstable. She would have destroyed Frank eventually with her depression and her guilt. Jenna shrugged. I simply accelerated the inevitable. Simon was backing away from his mother, his face white with shock. Mom, please tell me you're lying. Please tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Oh, sweetheart. Jenna's voice softened as she looked at her son. You have to understand. Everything I did for us, for our family, this woman. She gestured dismissively at Lauren. She's a threat to everything we've built. If Frank finds out she's alive, if he discovers the truth about how she disappeared, he already knows. The voice came from the tree line, and Lauren felt a surge of relief as Frank emerged from the shadows, followed by Philip Hartman and several other men she didn't recognize. Hello, Jenna, Frank said, his voice deadly calm. Having an interesting conversation. Jenna's composure cracked for just a moment before snapping back into place. Frank, darling, you're early. Am I, or am I 21 years too late? Frank walked closer, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. I know, Jenna. I know everything about the kidnapping. About Anna's car accident. About the warehouse where you planned to have my daughter murdered. Dad? Simon's voice was small and broken. Is it true? Is Lauren really? Yes, son. She's your sister. The sister you should have grown up with if your mother hadn't stolen her away. Jenna laughed. But there was hysteria creeping into the sound. Stolen her. I saved Frank from a life of mediocrity. Anna was holding him back, and that child would have done the same. I gave him success, wealth, a proper family. You gave him nothing but lies, Lauren said, finding her voice again. You destroyed everything he loved, and then convinced him it was his fault. And it worked beautifully for 21 years, Jenna snapped. Until you had to show up with that ridiculous photograph, stirring up memories that should have stayed buried. The men from the SUV were moving closer now, and Lauren realized they weren't just security. They were here to finish what Jenna had started 2 decades ago. Simon, Jenna said suddenly, her voice taking on a pleading tone. You have to understand. She's going to destroy our family. She's going to take your father away from us. Take your inheritance. Take everything that should be yours." Simon looked between his mother and Lauren, his 15-year-old face struggling to process the magnitude of what he was learning. "But she's my sister. She's a stranger who's been gone for 21 years, Jenna said desperately. "I'm your mother. I'm the one who raised you, who loves you, who's always been there for you." For a moment, Simon seemed to waver. Then he looked at Lauren, really looked at her, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. "She has Dad's eyes," he said quietly. "And Mom, what you're describing, kidnapping a little kid, that's not love, that's evil." Jenna's face transformed into something Lauren had never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage. "You ungrateful little..." She gestured sharply to the men from the SUV, who immediately started moving toward Lauren and Frank. But they'd only taken a few steps when more figures emerged from the forest. Police officers, moving with tactical precision. "It's over, Jenna," Frank said. "It's finally over." But as Lauren would learn in the next few minutes, Jenna Delaney had one final card to play, and she was willing to destroy everyone and everything rather than admit defeat. The confrontation at Rockcliffe Point exploded into chaos the moment Jenna realized she was trapped. "You think you've won?" she screamed, her perfectly composed facade finally cracking completely. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything I've worked for?" The two mercenaries she'd hired moved with professional efficiency, drawing weapons as the police officers shouted commands, but they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Philip Hartman had called in favors with the FBI, and the tactical team surrounding the cliff was prepared for exactly this scenario. "Drop your weapons," the lead officer's voice echoed across the promontory. "You're surrounded." Instead of surrendering, Jenna made a move that caught everyone off guard. She lunged toward Lauren, grabbing her arm with surprising strength and dragging her toward the cliff's edge. "Stay back," Jenna shouted, her manicured nails digging into Lauren's wrist as she pulled her closer to the precipice. "All of you, stay back or she goes over." Lauren felt rocks crumble beneath her feet as Jenna forced her to the very edge of Rockcliffe Point. The drop was at least 200 feet to the jagged rocks below, where Lake Michigan's waves crashed with deadly force. One wrong step, one moment of lost balance, and it would all be over. "Mom, don't." Simon's voice cracked with terror and desperation. "Please don't hurt her. Hurt her." Jenna's laugh was completely unhinged now. "I'm going to finish what I started 21 years ago. I should have made sure she was dead the first time." Frank took a careful step forward, his hands raised in a peaceful gesture. "Jenna, let her go. This isn't about Lauren anymore. This is between you and me." "Is it?" Jenna's grip tightened on Lauren's arm. "Because it seems to me that everything has always been about her, even when she was gone. She was still here, wasn't she? In every room of our house. In every conversation we had. In every moment you looked at me and wished I was someone else." Lauren could feel Jenna's fingernails breaking the skin on her wrist, could feel the woman's desperation and rage radiating like heat, but she could also feel something else. Memories flooding back with startling clarity. A playground, swings creaking in the breeze, a woman with blonde hair and a kind smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your daddy sent me to get you. There's been an accident." Fear, confusion, the wrongness of strange hands lifting her away from safety, a dark room, voices discussing her fate like she was an object instead of a person. "It has to look like an accident. No one can ever connect this back to us." "I remember," Lauren said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "I remember everything now." Jenna's grip faltered for just a moment. "Impossible. The doctors said." "The doctors said a lot of things," Lauren interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "But they were wrong. I remember you kneeling beside my swing. I remember you telling me that my father was hurt. I remember trusting you because you seemed nice. Because I was 4 years old and I didn't know that monsters could look like normal people." Simon was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he watched his mother hold his sister at the edge of a cliff. "Mom, please. She's just telling the truth. You can't hurt her for telling the truth." "The truth," Jenna's voice rose to a shriek. "The truth is that she ruined everything, even as a 4-year-old child. She was in my way." Frank couldn't see past his precious little daughter to notice what was right in front of him. What was in front of him was a woman who was willing to kidnap and murder a child to get what she wanted, Lauren said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "That's not love. Jenna, that's obsession." From somewhere behind them, Lauren heard Agnes's voice. "Mrs. Jenna, please, let the girl go. You've done enough harm." Lauren turned slightly and saw the elderly housekeeper emerging from the tree line, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. Agnes was walking slowly toward them, her hands empty and visible. "Agnes," Jenna said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I should have known you were involved in this. You always were too attached to that family. I've been protecting that family for 25 years, Agnes replied calmly, "including protecting them from you." "Protecting them? You mean interfering? You mean ruining my plans?" "I mean saving an innocent child's life," Agnes said, still moving slowly closer. "The child you tried to have murdered." Jenna's composure was completely gone now, her face contorted with rage and desperation. "I gave Frank everything, a stable home, a successful business partnership, a son who actually appreciates what he has, but none of it was ever enough, was it? Because he was always mourning his precious Anna and his perfect little daughter. He was mourning because you stole them from him," Frank said, his voice thick with 21 years of accumulated grief and rage. "You murdered my wife and kidnapped my daughter, and then you spent 2 decades comforting me for losses you caused. And it would have worked perfectly if she had just stayed dead," Jenna screamed, shaking Lauren so violently that more rocks crumbled from the cliff edge. That's when Simon made his move. The 15-year-old had been inching closer, while everyone's attention was focused on the confrontation between his mother and Lauren. Now he lunged forward, grabbing his mother's free arm and trying to pull her away from the cliff. "Let her go," he shouted. "She's my sister. Let her go." The sudden movement caught Jenna off guard. She stumbled, her grip on Lauren loosening just enough for Lauren to twist away, but the motion sent both Jenna and Simon dangerously close to the edge. Lauren scrambled backward, finally free but watching in horror as Simon tried to pull his mother to safety, even as she fought against him. "Simon, get away from her!" Frank shouted, starting to run toward them. But Jenna, in her desperation and rage, made one final, unforgivable choice. Instead of allowing her son to save her, she grabbed Simon and tried to pull him over the edge with her. "If I can't have this family," she screamed, "then no one can." What happened next occurred in the space of heartbeats, but felt like an eternity. Frank reached them just as Jenna and Simon teetered on the very edge of the cliff. He grabbed Simon with both hands, pulling with every ounce of strength he possessed. Lauren, acting on pure instinct, lunged forward and grabbed Simon's other arm. For a moment, all 4 of them hung in a precarious balance, Frank and Lauren pulling Simon to safety while Jenna tried to drag him into the abyss. "Let him go," Lauren shouted at Jenna. "He's your son. How can you?" "He's chosen his side," Jenna snarled, her eyes wild with madness. "He's chosen you over me, over everything I built for him." Simon was crying, terrified, trying to reach safety while his mother's grip threatened to pull him to his death. "Mom, please, I love you, but what you did was wrong. You can't kill people because you want something." For just a moment, Jenna's face softened as she looked at her son. "I did it all for you," she whispered. "Everything I did was to give you the life you deserved." "I don't want a life built on murder," Simon sobbed. "I want my sister alive. I want my family whole." Something in Jenna's expression shifted then, a look of profound loss, as if she was finally understanding what she'd destroyed in her quest to create the perfect life. Her grip on Simon loosened. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and for a moment she sounded like the woman Lauren had first met. Polished, elegant, almost kind. "I'm so sorry." Then she let go, not of Simon. She released her grip on the cliff edge, choosing to fall rather than continue to endanger her son. Frank and Lauren pulled Simon to safety as Jenna plummeted toward the rocks below, her scream echoing across the water until it was finally silent. The 3 of them collapsed in a heap several feet from the cliff edge. Frank and Lauren holding Simon as he sobbed for the mother who had tried to kill his sister, but who he had loved despite everything. "It's over," Frank whispered, pulling both his children against him. "It's finally over." Around them, the police and FBI agents secured the scene. The mercenaries were taken into custody. and Agnes stood watch like a guardian angel who had finally seen her charges safely home. But for Frank, Lauren, and Simon, huddled together on that clifftop as the sun set over Lake Michigan, the real journey was just beginning. The long, difficult, beautiful process of becoming a family again. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Frank Delaney's home office, illuminating a space that had been transformed from a shrine to grief into something entirely different. A celebration of family, both lost and found. Lauren sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, sorting through hundreds of photographs spread across the floor. Some were new, candid shots of Frank and Simon laughing over breakfast, formal portraits of the three of them that would grace the walls of Delaney hotels, pictures of Agnes teaching Lauren to make her grandmother's Irish soda bread. Others were older, recovered from storage boxes that Frank had been too heartbroken to open for 21 years. "Look at this one," Lauren said, holding up a faded photograph of a 4-year-old girl with dark curls chasing butterflies in a garden. "I remember this day. Anna was teaching me the names of all the flowers." Frank looked up from his desk where he'd been reviewing architectural plans for the Anna Whitman Hope Center. Even now, 6 months after learning the truth, he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the simple miracle of having ordinary conversations with his daughter. "You called them happy flowers," he said, smiling at the memory. "Every yellow bloom in the garden was a happy flower to you. Mom planted those roses because they reminded her of sunlight," Lauren said softly. She'd started calling Anna Mom about a month ago, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as the memories continued to surface. She said sunshine flowers would always find their way back to where they belonged. Simon walked into the office carrying 3 cups of coffee and a plate of Agnes's homemade scones. At 16, he'd grown 3 inches in the past 6 months and was now taller than Lauren. The trauma of that night at Rock Cliff Point had aged him in some ways, but it had also given him a maturity and depth that his peers couldn't match. "Agnes wants to know if you need anything for the ceremony this afternoon," he said, setting the coffee down carefully among the scattered photographs. "Just us," Frank replied. "Agnes, Philip, Sister Mary Catherine from St. Teresa's, and maybe a few of the board members from the Hope Center." Today marked the official opening of the Anna Whitman Hope Center for Missing Children. Built on the grounds of the former St. Teresa's orphanage, the facility would house resources for families searching for missing children, provide support for reunification services, and offer trauma counseling for both children and parents affected by abduction. Lauren had insisted on photographing the ceremony herself. Despite Frank's offers to hire a professional photographer for the event, this was her story too. Her journey from lost child to found daughter, to advocate for others who were still searching. "I finished the photo series last night," Lauren said, gesturing to a carefully arranged collection of prints on Frank's desk. 21 images, 1 for each year I was gone. The photographs told the story of a family's destruction and rebuilding. From the original image of Frank holding 4-year-old Paige that had started everything, through the dark years of grief and searching, to the recent pictures of their new life together. The final image was one Agnes had taken just last week. Frank, Lauren, and Simon sitting in the garden where Anna's yellow roses bloomed eternal. "The Tribune wants to run a feature story," Simon said, "about family reunification and the Hope Center. They want to interview all of us." Lauren looked at Frank questioningly. In the months since Jenna's death and the revelation of the kidnapping conspiracy, they'd been careful about media attention. The story had made national news initially, but Frank had used his influence to keep the more sensational aspects out of the headlines, protecting Simon's privacy and Lauren's desire to heal away from public scrutiny. "It's up to you," Frank said. "Both of you. This is your story as much as it is mine." "I think we should do it," Simon said quietly. "If it helps other families, if it helps other kids who are missing." Lauren reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. The relationship between them had been one of the most beautiful surprises of the past 6 months. Simon had thrown himself into being a brother with the same intensity he brought to everything else. Protective, loyal, endlessly curious about the sister he'd never known he had. "Then we'll do it together," Lauren said. "All of us." Agnes appeared in the doorway, as she had a habit of doing whenever the family needed something. She looked different now, lighter somehow, as if confessing her 21-year secret had lifted a physical weight from her shoulders. "The car is ready when you are," she said, And Master Simon, your father's attorney, called. The final paperwork has been processed. Simon's face lit up. For the past 3 months, he'd been working with Frank's lawyers to establish a scholarship fund in Jenna's name, not to honor what she'd done, but to channel something positive from the tragedy. The Jenna Hollis Memorial Scholarship would provide support for children in foster care who showed promise in the arts. Even now. You're trying to save her, Lauren had said when Simon first proposed the idea. Not save her, Simon had replied with wisdom beyond his years. But maybe save some other kid who's feeling lost and angry and doesn't know how to deal with it. Frank stood up from his desk and moved to the window that overlooked the garden. The yellow roses were in full bloom, their cheerful faces turned toward the sun, just as Anna had promised they would be. Sometimes I think about what she would say, he said quietly. Anna, about all of this. She'd be proud, Lauren said without hesitation, of how you never gave up looking for me, of how you raised Simon to be the kind of person who forgives even when forgiveness seems impossible, of how you turned tragedy into something that will help other families. She'd probably also scold me for taking 21 years to figure out what Agnes was trying to tell me, Frank added with a rueful smile. Agnes chuckled from the doorway. Mrs. Anna was never one to hold grudges, Mr. Delaney. She'd be too busy planning the next family gathering to worry about the past. As if summoned by their conversation about family gatherings, Frank's phone rang. Philip Hartman's name appeared on the caller ID. Philip, Frank answered. Please tell me you have good news. The best kind. Philip's voice came through the speaker. The adoption agency in Seattle found her, Maria Santos, the nurse who was working at St. Teresa's when Lauren first arrived. She's retired now, living with her daughter, but she remembers everything about that night. Lauren felt her heart skip a beat. They'd been searching for anyone who might have additional information about her arrival at the orphanage, partly for legal reasons, but mostly for the sake of completion. She wanted to understand every piece of her story. She's willing to talk, Philip continued. In fact, she's been hoping someone would contact her for years. She said Sister Iris made her promise to keep certain details confidential, but if the family ever came looking, we'll fly out next week, Frank said immediately. All of us. Actually, Philip's voice took on an amused tone. She's already booked a flight to Chicago, says she's been waiting 21 years to meet the little girl who grew up to find her way home. After Philip hung up, the family sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Lauren was thinking about the photograph that had started everything, the simple image of a father and daughter that had survived kidnapping, trauma, decades of separation, and a murderous conspiracy to bring them back together. I have something for you, Frank said suddenly, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to Lauren. Inside was a delicate gold locket, obviously old but beautifully maintained. When Lauren opened it, she found 2 tiny photographs, one of Anna holding baby Paige, and one of Frank pushing a toddler on a swing. It was your mother's, Frank said. She wore it every day until... I've been keeping it for you. Lauren fastened the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her heart. It wasn't heavy, but it carried the substance of love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Thank you, she whispered, for never giving up, for believing I was out there somewhere, for loving me enough to keep looking. Thank you, Frank replied, for finding your way back to us. 2 hours later, they stood together on the steps of the Anna Whitman Hope Center, watching as families who had experienced their own tragedies gathered to celebrate something positive being born from loss. Lauren raised her camera and captured the moment. Not the formal portraits that would appear in newspapers and brochures, but the candid instant when Simon made Frank laugh, when Agnes wiped away proud tears, when a family that had been broken found itself whole again. The photograph would join the others in Lauren's collection, but this one would be different. This one wouldn't represent loss or searching or pain. This one would represent what happened when love refused to give up. When family bonds proved stronger than time and trauma and even death, this one would represent coming home.